I didn't know when it began. Maybe it was a slow build, like a river carving its way through rock, not with force, but with quiet persistence. All I knew was that one day I woke up and realized I was stuck. Not physically, not even externally. My life looked fine on the outside, but something in me felt ... frozen, as if I were standing still while the world kept spinning. I'd go through my days like a machine, doing what was expected of me, smiling when I was supposed to, responding to messages, attending meetings, but inside there was a weight, a silent resistance to everything, like I was dragging something invisible behind me. I couldn't explain it to anyone, not really. They'd just tell me I was tired or needed a break. Maybe I did, but rest didn't help. Nothing helped. I tried distraction, scrolling endlessly on my phone, watching show after show, even traveling. But the stuckness came with me. It was like a shadow that knew me better than I knew myself. And so I started asking questions. Not out loud at first, just internally. Why do I feel like this? What's wrong with me? Why can't I move forward? That's when I came across a short quote attributed to the Buddha. It is not what happens to you, but your resistance to it, that causes suffering. I must have read it 100 times. Resistance. Was I resisting something? I didn't think so. I wasn't angry or fighting anything. I had just given up. But that idea planted a seed. For the first time, I sat still, not to meditate, not to breathe deeply and feel peaceful. I didn't even know how to do that. I just stopped. I turned everything off. No music, no phone, no talking, just silence. And for the first time, I could hear it, the constant noise in my mind. The arguments, the doubts, the fear. And underneath it all, a voice whispering, "You're not enough." I had always believed that voice. I never questioned it. It had become the wallpaper of my mind, always there, unnoticed, but shaping everything I did. It told me not to try because I'd fail. It told me to avoid change because I might get hurt. It told me to stay in my lane, keep things predictable, avoid pain. And so I did. For years. But that silence, that was something new. That was the first time I met myself without distractions. And it wasn't easy. Stillness didn't bring peace right away. In fact, it brought discomfort, a lot of it. I wanted to get up, check my phone, do something, anything. But I didn't. I stayed. I don't know how long I sat there that first time. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. But something happened. Not a big epiphany, not a divine light or voice, just a breath, a real breath. The kind that goes all the way down into your belly. And in that breath, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Space. Space between me and my thoughts. Space between the voice of fear and my own awareness. That night, I dreamed of a river. It was calm but powerful, flowing through a quiet forest. I was standing in it, waist deep, feeling the water press against me. And I understood I had been trying to stand still in a river that only wanted to carry me forward. My suffering wasn't because I was stuck, it was because I was refusing to flow. The next day, I went back to that quote. Resistance causes suffering. Not just resistance to pain, but resistance to truth, to change, to who I really am beneath all the layers of fear. And suddenly, I remembered something else I'd read once. The root of suffering is attachment. Was attached to an idea of who I should be. I was attached to safety, to perfection, to control. I was trying to manage life like a chessboard, planning every move, avoiding risks, calculating outcomes. But life isn't a game, it's a dance. And I had forgotten how to move. So I began again. Slowly, I didn't try to fix everything. I didn't set big goals. I just made space. Every morning, 10 minutes of stillness. I'd sit with myself and listen, not to the noise, but to what was behind the noise. And gradually, something began to shift. I started noticing things. The way light came through the window, the sound of birds, the warmth of water on my skin when I washed my hands. Little things, beautiful things. And I realized that I hadn't been living, I'd been surviving. I'd been sleepwalking through a life that was waiting for me to wake up. The stillness didn't fix everything, but it opened a door. And behind that door was a version of me I had lost, or maybe had never truly met. A version that wasn't scared all the time. A version that didn't need to be perfect. A version that trusted the flow. I'm still learning. Some days I still feel stuck, but now I know the difference between being stuck in life and being stuck in my mind. And I know how to return. Not by pushing harder, not by forcing solutions, but by being still. Because in stillness, the mud settles, the water clears, and we see. That's what the Buddha was pointing to. Not a perfect life, not eternal happiness, but clarity, freedom, the kind that comes not from running away from our struggle, but from turning toward it, gently, patiently, like you'd sit with a friend in pain. So, if you're feeling stuck, maybe don't try to escape. Just sit, listen, breathe. There's something in that silence that knows the way forward, even when you don't. It was during one of those quiet mornings, long before the rest of the world had stirred, that I began to understand the power of simply watching. Not analyzing, not fixing, not labeling, just observing. I'd sit in silence, eyes open or closed, and wait for something to happen. But all that came was noise, endless thoughts, doubts, and memories. I used to think stillness meant emptiness. That, to be still, my mind had to be silent. And when it wasn't, I assumed I was failing. But slowly, something began to shift. I realized that stillness isn't about the absence of thought. It's about the absence of judgment. I remember one morning in particular, I had been feeling heavy for days. Old wounds had resurfaced, memories I thought I'd buried long ago. They arrived like uninvited guests, crashing through the calm I had tried so hard to create. My first instinct was to push them away, to tighten up, to tell myself, not now, I'm trying to be peaceful. But then, a different voice, quieter, gentler, whispered, "What if you just watch?" So I did. I stopped resisting. I sat back and let the thoughts come. One by one, they rose up, some painful, some strange, some random, and I simply noticed them, like clouds passing across a sky that never complained, never held on. And in that space of observation, something remarkable happened. The emotions that once felt so overwhelming began to soften. The stories that played on loop started to lose their grip, not because I changed them, but because I no longer identified with them. I was no longer inside the storm. I was the sky holding it all. This is what the Buddha meant. I think when he taught about mindfulness, sati, it isn't a technique to control the mind. A clear, non-judgmental presence that reflects whatever arises without clinging, without aversion. I used to believe I had to be a certain way to be spiritual, calm, kind, wise. But the truth is, real transformation began not when I changed who I was, but when I stopped pretending. When I allowed even my messinzas, my anger, my fear to exist without shame. To watch them like a parent watches a child having a tantrum, with patience, with compassion, with deep understanding. There was one moment, sitting quietly near a window, when I became aware of a sharp tightness in my chest. Normally, I would have ignored it or tried to distract myself, but instead, I turned toward it. I placed all my attention there, not trying to make it go away, just being curious. And beneath that tightness, I found sadness, a loneliness I hadn't acknowledged in years. It had always been there, hidden behind my busyness and distractions. But now, held in the mirror of stillness, it began to unravel. Slowly, gently, tears came, not dramatic, not loud, just quiet release. Not because I was broken, but because I had finally stopped running. And for the first time, that sadness wasn't a problem to solve. It was a part of me to embrace. Over time, I started to notice how judgment had quietly shaped so much of my life. The moment a thought arose, I'd label it bad, silly, useless. When an emotion appeared, too much, not spiritual, weak. When I made a mistake, failure, I didn't even realize I was doing it. But it was constant, a stream of inner commentary that never allowed me to simply be. But the mirror doesn't judge the reflection. It doesn't say, "This image is ugly," or "This is not what I want to see." It simply reflects. And the more I practiced being that mirror, through breath, through silence, through stillness, the more I realized how much freedom lived in non-judgment. There is a quiet revolution that happens when you learn to observe without naming. A thought comes, and instead of clinging, you let it go. A memory surfaces, and you hold it with kindness. A fear rises, and you say, "I see you." And that's enough. I remember reading once that the Buddha described the mind as a monkey, restless, agitated, always moving. But the path to peace wasn't about forcing the monkey to be still. It was about watching it without chasing after it. With time, the monkey grows calm, not because it's been tamed, but because it feels safe. Seen, that's what I've learned in this practice of stillness. That healing doesn't come from force. Clarity doesn't come from thinking harder. It comes from space, from the quiet courage to witness yourself exactly as you are, without flinching. Some mornings, I still wake up with thoughts that scream or emotions that twist in my gut. But now, I don't panic. I sit, I breathe, I observe. And in that watching, I remember, I am not the storm. I am the space that holds it. Stillness, I've come to believe, is not the end of movement. It's the beginning of awareness. A mirror that shows you not only the chaos, but the peace that holds it all. The part of you that has never been broken, never been lost, only waiting to be seen. And once you begin to see through that mirror, something else begins to emerge. Not just calm, but love. Not just silence, but wisdom. And not just relief, but freedom. The freedom to be fully present, fully human, and fully awake. For most of my life, I tried to control everything. I controlled my schedule down to the hour. I planned conversations in my head before they even happened. I held tight to my expectations of myself, of others, of how life should unfold. It gave me a sense of safety, or so I thought. Like if I just held the reins tightly enough, nothing would fall apart. I wouldn't fall apart. But the truth is, the tighter I held on, the more suffocated I felt. Life kept slipping through my fingers like water, no matter how much I tried to contain it. And I couldn't understand why. I was doing everything right, wasn't I? Then one day, something small but unexpected happened. A project I had invested months into fell apart overnight. Emails went unanswered. Opportunities vanished. The structure I had carefully built crumbled. At first, I reacted with panic. I scrambled to fix it, to force it back into place. I made calls, sent messages, lost sleep, but nothing changed. And that's when the cracks appeared, not just in my plans, but in me. I began to see how much energy I had spent trying to hold life in a box, trying to avoid disappointment, trying to avoid pain. And somewhere in that struggle, I'd lost the ability to flow. I came across a teaching of the Buddha that hit me like a silent truth. You only lose what you cling to. At first, I resisted this clinging. I wasn't clinging. I was being responsible, organized, smart, but deep down, I knew. I wasn't planning for the sake of presence. I was planning to avoid uncertainty. I had mistaken control for safety, and that illusion had become my prison. It was around this time that I began a simple practice, noticing every time I said or thought, "It has to go this way." That phrase, I realized, was at the root of my suffering. Whether it was in relationships, work, health, or daily routines, I was constantly fighting life to meet an image I had created in my mind. And every time life deviated from that image, I felt betrayed, hurt, frustrated. But the betrayal was never from life. It was from the fantasy of control I had built. One morning, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, I watched leaves being blown across the road. They didn't resist. They didn't fight the wind or demand to stay in one place. They danced, shifted, moved freely with the current of the moment. And in that simple movement, I saw what I had forgotten, that surrender isn't weakness, it's alignment. I started reflecting on all the times I had been most free, most joyful, most alive. Not one of those moments came from control. They came from surrender, from spontaneity, from letting things unfold naturally, even messily. The Buddha spoke often of impermanence, anicca. Nothing stays the same. Everything changes. And trying to hold on to anything, even happiness, only creates suffering. The very act of gripping is the beginning of pain. It's strange, isn't it? We fear letting go because we think we'll lose something. But often, it's the holding on that's costing us more than we realize. I began practicing little acts of letting go. If someone canceled plans, I let it be. If my morning didn't go according to schedule, I adjusted without resistance. If emotions rose that felt uncomfortable, I allowed them without labeling or suppressing. And in those moments, something shifted. A new kind of peace emerged. Not the peace of perfect conditions, but the peace of inner spaciousness. The peace that comes when you stop fighting life and start trusting it. One day, during meditation, I had a sudden image, me standing on the edge of a river, trying to hold back the water with my hands, exhausted, defeated. And then, in that same vision, I simply let go and stepped in. The river didn't drown me. It carried me, gently, surely, naturally. That image stayed with me. It reminded me that life doesn't need my control. It needs my cooperation. It's about loosening the grip. Letting go isn't passive. It's incredibly active. It requires awareness, presence, and faith. Not blind faith in fate, but a deep trust in the intelligence of the present moment. A trust that life, in its own rhythm, knows what it's doing, even when I don't. And every time I forget, every time I try to force something, I return to the breath. Because the breath is the ultimate teacher of letting go. We inhale, but we must exhale. We hold, but we must release. It is in the exhale that the body softens. It is in the release that life flows. Control is often rooted in fear. The fear of what might happen if we don't manage every detail. But what if we reframe that fear? What if we asked, instead, what might open up if I stopped trying so hard to manage everything? When I started letting go, life didn't become perfect, but it became real. Rich, unexpected. Yes, there were disappointments. Yes, there were surprises I didn't like. But I wasn't shattered by them anymore, because I wasn't clinging. I think this is what the Buddha pointed to in the Eightfold Path, especially right effort and right view. Not effort to control, but effort to be awake, to act without attachment, to live without illusion. The illusion of control is comforting, but it's still an illusion. True peace comes when we see it for what it is and choose trust instead. Trust in life, trust in ourselves, trust in ourselves. So now, when things fall apart, and they sometimes do, I breathe. I remind myself, this too is part of the path. I let go of the story I had written and open to the one being written now. And every time I let go, I move forward. Not in the way I expected, but in the way I needed. And that, I've come to learn, is more than enough. I spent so much of my life chasing moments that hadn't arrived, and clinging to moments that had already passed. I didn't even realize it at first, how often I was either worrying about something in the future or replaying something from the past. My mind lived everywhere but here. And because of that, I constantly felt disconnected, not just from others, but from myself. Even during calm days, there was a low hum of restlessness inside me, as if something was missing, as if I was always just one step away from happiness, from peace, from fulfillment. I would tell myself, once I finish this task, once this week is over, once I figure it all out, then I'll finally feel okay. But that moment never came. One day, I heard a monk speak about the now, not in a poetic or abstract way, but in a deeply practical sense. He said, "You suffer because you're not here. Peace doesn't exist in time. It exists in presence." I didn't fully understand what he meant until I began paying attention. It started with small things. I began noticing my breath as I washed the dishes. I tried to really feel the ground beneath my feet when I walked. I stopped eating meals while distracted and instead tried to experience the flavors, the texture, the warmth. At first, it was awkward. My mind kept running off, pulling me back into thoughts about tomorrow or memories from last year. But I kept returning to the breath, to the sound, to this moment, and slowly, something changed. I remember one evening, I was sitting outside as the sun was setting. There was nothing particularly special about that day. I had no epiphany, no breakthrough. But for the first time in a long time, I felt the moment, the softness of the wind, the way the sky turned orange and gold, the quiet sound of leaves rustling. I wasn't thinking about anything. I was simply here. And in that here, I felt free. It was a different kind of freedom, not the kind that comes from having options or control, but the freedom of not being caught in time, the freedom of not needing life to be different, the freedom of being fully and completely in the now. I realized how much suffering is born from leaving the present. Guilt lives in the past. Anxiety lives in the future. But peace only ever lives in this breath, this single moment. Right now, I began to see how even my most painful emotions changed when I met them in the present. When I stayed with my sadness now, it didn't grow into despair. When I stayed with my fear now, it didn't spiral into panic. Most of the time, it wasn't the emotion itself that overwhelmed me. It was the story I told around it, the timeline I attached to it, the ways I believed it would never end. But when I returned to this breath, to this second, everything softened. The Buddha once said, "Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment." That teaching sounds simple, almost too simple. But living it is an act of radical awareness. It's the foundation of true awakening. I noticed something else, too. When I lived in the present, I became more compassionate, not only toward others, but toward myself. I stopped rushing through conversations, stopped multitasking my way through life. I began to really listen. I noticed the way someone's eyes softened when they felt seen. I noticed the small gestures people made when they cared. These things were always happening. I had just been too distracted to notice. And with presence came gratitude, not the forced kind, but a natural appreciation for things I had taken for granted. Clean water, warm food, someone saying my name gently, the way my lungs filled without my asking. The present moment revealed the quiet abundance I'd overlooked for years. But I also discovered that the present can be uncomfortable when there's pain. Being here with it isn't easy. But I learned that being present doesn't mean pretending everything is okay. It means acknowledging what is without trying to escape it. And in that honesty, I found resilience. It's like standing in a storm without running for cover. At first, it feels unbearable. But eventually, you realize you are the sky, not the storm, and storms pass. One day, during a meditation, I had a moment where everything dropped away. The past, the future, even the identity I clung to. There was no story, no role to play, no outcome to chase. Just silence, just presence, and in that space, I felt something I can only describe as home. Not a place, but a state of being. A deep okayness with everything as it was. That's when it became clear. We spend our lives searching for peace in all the wrong places. We look for it in achievements, in relationships, in control. But it was never hidden. It was simply quiet, waiting here in the now. The more I practiced returning to the present, the more I noticed how life itself is always unfolding perfectly in the moment. Not in my expectations, not in my plans, but here, right here. Even the difficult moments carried wisdom. If I was present enough to receive it, it's not that the past and future are wrong. They have their place, but they're meant to be visited, not lived in. The present is the only place where anything real can happen. It's the only place where love can be felt, where healing can begin, where truth can be known now. When I catch myself drifting, worrying about next tweet or replaying yesterday, I smile gently and return to the breath, to the body, to the sensation of being alive now, because now is enough. This moment, just as it is complete, and in that presence, I've found a kind of liberation that no achievement ever gave me. The Buddha never promised a life without suffering, but he offered a path, a way to meet life with openness, with clarity, with peace, and the doorway to that path is always right here in the still and sacred power of the present moment. There comes a moment, quiet, unplanned, when something within begins to stir. Not a loud awakening, not an explosion of understanding, but a soft shift, a gentle knowing. For me, that moment didn't come in a temple or during a profound meditation. It came while I was sitting alone in my room early morning, listening to the distant sound of birds just beginning their song. The world hadn't fully woken yet, and in that silence, something opened inside me. I had spent so much time trying to become something better, wiser, calmer, freer. I thought awakening was a destination, a mountain I would climb after enough practice, enough discipline, enough silence. But what I began to understand in that moment, and in so many quiet moments after, is that awakening is not becoming. It is remembering, returning, uncovering what has always been here. Stillness was the doorway, not the forced kind of stillness, not the kind where I sat with tension in my body, waiting for some grand realization. No, it was the kind of stillness that came from finally giving up the fight, not out of defeat, but out of deep acceptance. I stopped chasing peace and instead made space for it. I stopped resisting discomfort and instead invited it to speak. And what I discovered in that silence was not emptiness, it was presence. A vast, spacious awareness that held everything without judgment. Thoughts still came, emotions still rose and fell. But I was no longer clinging to them, no longer mistaking them for who I was. I was witnessing them. And in that witnessing, I was free. The Buddha once described awakening not as gaining something new, but as removing the veil of delusion. The delusion that we are separate. The delusion that happiness lies somewhere out there. The delusion that we must control, fix, perfect, achieve. As I began to rest in stillness more often, I started seeing those veils more clearly. I saw how I had been living with a constant narrative in my head, telling me who I was, what I lacked, what I had to do to be worthy. That voice had been so loud, I had never questioned it. But in stillness, it began to quiet. And beneath it, I discovered a self that didn't need to prove anything. A self that was already whole. At first, it felt unfamiliar. This spaciousness, this simplicity, I had spent years wrapped in layers, identity, ambition, fear, memory. Now, those layers were peeling away. And though a part of me was afraid of losing control, of losing who I thought I was, a deeper part felt relief. As if I had finally come home to myself, There were moments of resistance, moments when the old patterns returned, the urge to do, to fix, to strive. But the more I returned to stillness, the more I saw that those patterns were just waves on the surface. They weren't the ocean, and the ocean, I realized, had always been calm beneath the storm. There was one evening, after a long, tiring day, when I sat in meditation without expectation. I was too exhausted to try. I just let go. And in that letting go, something softened. My breath became slower. My thoughts became distant. And then, not in words, but in a feeling, I touched something profound, a sense of unconditional okayness. Not happiness, not excitement, not bliss, just okayness. Deep, immovable peace. I understood, in that moment, why the Buddha smiled beneath the Bodhi tree. Not because he found a way to escape suffering, but because he realized he didn't have to. Suffering arises, but it is not who we are. It is weather passing through the sky, and the sky, our awareness, is untouched. This was the path to liberation. Not escape, not control, but understanding. Seeing things clearly, meeting life as it is, without needing it to be different, and knowing that the one who observes, the one who rests in stillness, is already free. I began carrying this awareness into daily life. Walking became a meditation. Listening became deeper. Even washing my hands or drinking tea became sacred. Because when you are fully present, everything reveals its true nature. Everything becomes a teacher, a mirror, a reminder. I also realized that awakening isn't a one-time event. It's a continual unfolding, a series of small deaths, of illusions, of false identities, of fear, and small rebirths into deeper clarity, deeper compassion. Each moment is an opportunity to awaken, to choose presence, openness over defense, stillness over reaction, and that stillness, I found, is not passive. It is alive, vibrant, awake. It listens. It responds from wisdom rather than impulse. It loves without needing anything in return. It sees suffering and meets it with compassion, not panic. It speaks, when it must, from truth, not ego. One of the greatest gifts of stillness is that it teaches you to trust life, not blindly, but intimately. You begin to see that everything arises in its own time, and everything falls away in its own time. You don't have to force the river to flow. You just have to stop fighting the current. So now, when fear arises, I meet it in stillness. When joy visits, I welcome it without clinging. When uncertainty appears, I breathe and remain. Because I know now that nothing lasts, and in that impermanence lies a deeper peace. This is the liberation the Buddha pointed to. Not a life free from pain, but a heart free from resistance, a mind free from illusion, a being fully rooted in the present, awake to what is, and free to respond with wisdom and love. And it all begins in stillness, not some grand retreat or distant monastery, but right here, in this breath, in this body, in this moment. Stillness is the path. Stillness is the teacher. Stillness is the home we've been searching for. And when we rest in it, truly rest, we remember who we are. Not the story, not the striving, but the presence that holds it all, silent, spacious, free.